Okay, so now we're going to go through the use of one of our water-fed pole systems. Now, water-fed poles have made great advancements over the last couple years. They're now carbon fiber. They used to be really big and bulky steel. They also have filtration systems, which allow the water, when passing through, to basically cleanse out all the sediments and the chemicals that used to leave the water droplets on the glass. So once it goes through our deionization filtration system, essentially we'll be dispensing the same as rainwater. So it won't leave any marks if the tank still has cleansing power left in it. I'm going to show you how to hook up the system, and then I'm also going to show you how to use our TDS meter, and that will evaluate how well the filtration system is working. So first things first, you have to use a garden hose hooked up to the wall, and it's going to go into the infeed. There's a little "in" inscribed on the plastic filter. This is going to go through a carbon filter, and then it's going to go through our deionization tank. Now this tank has resin in it, and over time it will deplete its ability to cleanse the water. So it's very important that we use what's called a TDS meter in order to check how many parts per million is in the water. So ordinary water that comes out of the tap of a city is usually between 40 and 50 parts per million. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take a small sample of the water that's before the filter, and when we put it in the TDS meter, you're going to get a readout of 39. Now if we dispense this type of water onto the glass, it's going to actually leave water droplets as soon as it dries. After the water goes through the filtration system, we can see that we're getting a readout of 0 parts per million. Now anything 0 to 10 will allow us the ability to go without water droplets when we dispense the water onto the glass. Anything after 10, that means that our tank now has to be replenished of the resin, and it's time to get it refreshed. It's super important that you communicate this to your crew leader or to your manager to make sure that the next guys that take out the tank aren't stuck with a tank that's not going to function properly for them. Now there's a couple things when you're using the water-fed pole. Number one, this stuff is super expensive. This is all carbon fiber, and this filter is imported from the United States. So it's very important that we use extreme levels of care when handling the equipment. It is all plastic or carbon fiber, which means it's breakable. So anytime, please, when you're setting it down, do it gently. As well, these tanks are very flimsy at times, especially when we have the hoses leading into and out of them. So it's very important that we use care when using this equipment. Secondly, this pole will extend up to 35 feet in the air, so it's very important that you're in tune with your surroundings. Anytime there's power lines around, it's very important that you take note of that and exhibit due care when working around power lines, because it will conduct the electricity right through your body. And there have been stories where, unfortunately, window cleaners have had serious injury or death as a result of using these carbon fiber poles and hitting power lines. Okay, so now it's time to complete our setup process. At this point, we have an infeed of water coming into the purification system, and we verified that basically the water is now being cleansed out of all the minerals and chemicals, and it's dispensing pure water. At this point, we've checked the area, and there's no power lines that could be of potential concern, and now it's time to set up the remainder of the water-fed pole system. We try and keep this as organized as possible, so we have this handy little claw system here that keeps our tubing in a nice clean order. And when you take it off, it's good to just put it right on the bridge here and clamp it down. At that point, it's time to just unravel the hose, and then it's going to be plugged in to the outfeed of the tank here. Now there is an on-off valve right here, and that will control when water is to pass through. Now keep in mind, if you're on a large commercial or strata job and we're using the water-fed pole, you could have a number of hoses leading into as well as out of the tank. The point is, the water has to pass through the tank at some point. So it really doesn't matter how many hoses are on either side, and the water-fed pole will be able to function just fine. Now, we use the water-fed pole for a variety of different reasons. Number one, it does have a reach of over 4 stories, so it's great in terms of the safety mechanisms in order to prevent us from having to go up a big 40-foot ladder. Generally speaking, we tell our customers it does about a 80 to 85% job. It's not as good as getting right up to the glass and cleaning it with our traditional method, but it does do a very good job. And with the safety considerations, there's some jobs where there's no other way that we could possibly do it. Anytime we don't have enough linear footage away from the building in order to properly set up the ladder, it provides a great opportunity for a water-fed pole when we're not able to get a man lift into the area. So at this point, it's all set up, ready to go. And all it is a matter of flicking this on-off switch, and water will be dispensed through the tubing all the way up to the top of the brush of the water-fed pole. At this point, I would like to take the water-fed pole itself and get into position. And then what we'll do is we'll actually extend each of the different leaves, and then we can turn the water on and clean some glass. Set up, and now it's time to extend the water-fed pole to the desired height. Now, each one of our water-fed poles has a number of different shafts, and we always start with the highest one first. So to do that, basically you just back off one of these little clasps, and then you're going to extend it to the point that you need. Now, like I said, you always start at the highest one or the thinnest one first, and you go until you see the red. As soon as you see the red, you know that's the maximum height that you can do with that shaft, and it's good to back it down to the point where you can't actually see the color red anymore. At that point, you just slap the clasp back, and now it's stuck in place, so it's ready to go. I'm going to be cleaning this window for demonstration purposes, so that's pretty much all I need to comfortably reach the top of the glass. One thing when you're using the water-fed pole, it's important to be cognizant of the surroundings. We don't want to trample any plants. For working around a garden or anything that has garden furniture, it's important to recognize things that are fragile when we're coming through. Generally, the tendency is to focus just on what we're doing, but you have to be aware of the circumstances around you as well. Okay, so I just turned on the water-fed pole, and as you can see, it dispenses from 2 different jets within the brush head itself. When you're starting out, it's important not to hit the top sill, because after we're done the cleaning, it's going to continue to drip, and that sill water is not going to be clean. So if you can get within the top inch of the window, that's considered good enough, because there's going to be a set of blinds on the inside, which will kind of provide a bit of a buffer when it comes to evaluating the cleanliness of the glass. So I'm going to start at the very top, and I'm just going to easily go back and forth along that top buffer zone so that I know that it's been taken care of. At this point, you want to use nice long strokes to pass over the glass in a very systematic fashion. It's like washing a car. If you miss any aspect of the window, it's going to show through when it dries. So it's important to be very systematic when you're passing over the glass. And if you need to, you can adjust the clasp so that you can access everything with a decent amount of vigor. The cleaning comes from the actual pressure against the glass, and sometimes when you're 3 or 4 stories up, it can get pretty flimsy, so it's important to get a decent amount of leverage and to scrub over all areas of the glass. You'll notice the top 3 inches and the bottom 3 inches are often the ones that could use a little bit more coverage, so it's important to give those an adequate scrubbing. So at this point, the entire window's been passed over a couple times because of our overlap. And what I want to do is I want to try and get a bit of a reflection in the glass. Anytime you see the water drizzling down and then kind of separating and breaking apart a piece of debris, you know that you have to give that area a little bit more preference when it comes to the scrubbing. When you're all done, water should be coming across the glass very smoothly, and there shouldn't be any sort of resistance from debris that's still on the glass. To finish up the window, what you want to do is you basically want to pull away from the glass. Again, you don't want to hit that top sill, and you want to just drizzle the water across as if to rinse it. And then you're going to pull the water-fed pole away from it. Anytime you're going to set the water-fed pole down, it's really important to keep in mind that you don't want it to tip over, especially when it's 30 or 40 feet over. If this thing crashes over, it's going to snap. It's that simple. So even before we shut it off, I like to set it up in a manner that's relatively stable, and you got to be aware of the surroundings. If it's a particularly gusty day, you may not be able to get away with this. And then basically it's time to go over to the tanks and shut off the on-off valve. Okay, so we're all done with the water-fed pole on this window, and we used it for demonstration purposes. What I want to do before we wrap it all up is basically show you how to extend the pole to get a high window. The idea is exactly the same. Essentially, we're going to release the clasp, we're going to extend the shaft no further than the red, and continue through the lower levels of the shafts. So as I mentioned, this pole is 35 feet. So it could easily hit a 4th-story window. In order to bring it down, we're going to do the exact opposite. So nice and gently, you're going to want to make sure you have control, and you're going to bring it down nice and slowly. Like so. And those are the basics of using the water-fed pole. Again, just to summarize, it's super important, first and foremost, before we clean any glass, to check your surroundings and make sure there's no low-lying power lines that could potentially make contact with the water-fed pole. After that, when you bring everything back down, it's important to, again, recognize the extreme value that's placed on this sort of equipment. So we always want to take care of it with a very high level of respect. So in order to do that, you're just going to simply disconnect the water-fed pole line, and then you're going to wrap it up so it's nice and neat when it goes back in the van. Again, we have this handy little cable lock, so it works kind of like a handcuff, and it's going to keep it in a nice wrapped fashion. This kind of gets draped loosely over top of the brush head itself, and then you can grab the pole and the purifier at the same time and place it back into the cargo section of the van. Again, make sure when you place it in the van, it's set in a manner that is not going to cause it to fall out